It's lovely to see so many of you at this December edition of the CRAE webinar series. I'm Anna Remington, Director of CRAE, and as lots of you may already know, here at the Centre for Research in Autism and Education, we're a team of autistic and non-autistic staff and students based within the UCL Institute of Education and part of the Department of Psychology and Human Development. We aim to conduct high-quality cutting-edge research, but also to ensure that the results of that research reach those who stand to benefit from them. The CRAE webinar series is one aspect of that, allowing people both within and beyond academia to hear from some of the key researchers, practitioners and advocates in the field. Through everything we do, we take a participatory approach, which means that we work with autistic people in all stages of our research and initiatives, from the initial design right through to the sharing of the outcomes. We hope that this means that the work we do is meaningful for the autistic community. At this point, I'd like to say a big thank you to all our funders, supporters and team members who contribute to our work and make it all possible. In particular, a special thank you to Pears Foundation for their generous ongoing support that underpins everything that we do. Now, enough about CRAE and on to today's speaker. I'm delighted to introduce Maria Ashworth. Until very recently, Maria was part of our CRAE crew, where she did her PhD on supported employment initiatives, which Brett Heathman, Laura Crane and I had the privilege of supervising. Before starting her PhD, Maria worked as a research assistant on various projects related to developmental psychology, autism, and legislation surrounding special educational needs and disabilities. She is now the research manager at Ambitious About Autism, where she actively contributes to developing autism-inclusive practices and policies in education and employment. And it's just so wonderful, Maria, to have you back with us for this afternoon. You're all very welcome to put questions for Maria in the Q&A box, and our wonderful Brian Irvine will ask her as many as possible at the end, and you can also post them anonymously if you prefer. Now I'm delighted to hand over to Maria, who will be talking today about tracking and evaluating Employ Autism. Without further ado, over to you, Maria.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here and on the other side. I used to be the person behind the scenes, so yeah, thank you so much for having me. I will share my screen quickly. Okay, I'm going to assume you can see the right slide unless I hear anything else.
It looks great. Looks great, Maria.
Perfect, thank you. So yeah, thank you to Anna and Brian for the really lovely introductions, and it's so lovely to be back in this capacity. As Anna said, I recently finished my PhD and now I am working as a research manager at Employ Autism. So I'm kind of doing this talk in two capacities in that sense, hence the Ambitious About Autism slide design as well. So without further ado, I will get on. I'll quickly go over the contents of the talk quickly. So I just want to start with some acknowledgements, and then I'll go over a bit of a background of the literature surrounding supported employment initiatives, explain a little bit about how the project came to be and what Employ Autism is. And then I will go through the 3 studies of my PhD, and then I'll kind of bring all those findings together to have a bit more of a general discussion about what they mean overall. And then there'll be time for some questions, which I'd be really happy to answer. So we'll move on to start with some acknowledgements. Sorry, I'm moving a screen up there. So yes, first of all, before I get on to anything else, I just want to say a massive thank you to Ambitious About Autism sponsors and Ambitious About Autism themselves for the opportunity to work on such an important initiative. And I really wanted to also thank the staff on the Employ Autism programme, without whom this research would not have happened. They were amazing in helping with recruitment, and helping me with lots of details. So in particular, thank you to Jade, Felicity and Claire for all their help during that time. I'm also hugely grateful to everybody who took part in this research, particularly the interns who took part. They were really generous with their time and in lots of cases doing surveys and interviews months, even years after they finished their internship. So I'm really grateful for their commitment to the research. And finally, thank you to the two autistic consultants who provided really amazing feedback on the interview schedules for interns, employers, and parents. So I'll start with a little bit of background on Employ Autism, or on employment, and then we'll move on to background for Employ Autism. So as I'm sure many of you will know, despite 77% of autistic people saying that they do want to work, autistic people have now the third lowest employment rates of all the sort of 20 disability groups, at only 30%, autistic people being in some kind of employment. Employment or lack of it has a really broad impact for autistic people. So not only related to more financial and economic security, this also has a wider impact on future independence. But employment can also be really important for kind of adding additional meaning, and also for facilitating opportunities for social and like community participation. And is also really influential for quality of life and mental health as well. The transition from child to adult services has often been described as a cliff edge, because there's very little support during that transition from employment to adulthood as soon as somebody leaves those child services. So this means that there's even fewer opportunities for autistic people to develop those key skills and get key work experience opportunities during that transition into adulthood to support further employment and their career after that as well. There is some evidence that supported employment initiatives like internships can be really helpful to increase employment rates for autistic young people. So this supported employment model aims to help autistic people find and keep competitive employment through work experience in competitive or some integrated settings. So things like internships, really. And these work experiences or internships are more tailored to the individual's strengths and also their prior work experience, and they're often coupled with some support from staff as well, and sometimes occasionally some training for employers as well. So these initiatives have been found to help individuals find and apply for suitable jobs, and they have been in long-term studies. There have been some findings that show employment rates can range from can go up to about 96%, retention rates at about 80%, and much lower unemployment rates as well. And there are also findings that there's increased income and more hours worked after people have engaged with supported employment initiatives. There have also been some qualitative studies about this and about supported employment initiatives. And the few that have looked into this, they've reported aspects such as improved well-being, better feelings of independence and self-confidence as well. And the autistic people who take part in these interviews also report a development of key skills, which are really important for further employment and community engagement as well. But despite these, this kind of overview, the few that have been evaluated, which are these studies, they have some issues more related to accessibility. So, for example, they might only be available to people in school and in that kind of compulsory secondary school level age. They might only be available to autistic people with a learning disability. And also a lot of these supported employment initiatives have quite a large focus on social skills as well, and addressing social skills. And while that might be helpful to some individuals, they might find that helpful, there isn't so much of a focus on what can be done within the workplace environment and what employers can do to to provide reasonable adjustments and make the workplace more hospitable and more pleasant for autistic people as well. So this is where Employ Autism and Ambitious About Autism come in. So for those of you that don't know, Ambitious About Autism is a charity for autistic children and young people, with a focus, a lot of this on education and employment as well. So Employ Autism was originally a campaign that was driven by Ambitious About Autism's youth network, which is a panel of autistic young people. And they developed this Employ Autism campaign. And this was to highlight employment inequalities for autistic people. And one of the key things that came from that was that autistic young people were saying they needed much better work experience opportunities. So from this, 2 work experience programs were developed. And this was supported internships. So this is for people aged 16 to 25 with an education, health and care plan. And this is often, they've adopted a lot of the project search model types here for such individuals. And then also they developed Autism Exchange. And this is for paid work experience for autistic people age 18 plus without a learning disability as well. And then from this led to the development of Employ Autism, and this builds upon that Autism Exchange model to provide paid work experience programs, but this is deployed at a national level, so this is throughout the UK. So Employ Autism, they partner with businesses and organisations across the UK to provide paid internships to autistic adults. And the scheme really aims to support autistic young adults to move successfully from education into employment by providing them with that useful work experience, and also to build confidence in that transition to employment too. So crucially, they provide tailored support not only to the autistic young person, but also to the employers, and they provide this support before, during and after the internships. So this includes one-to-one help setting up the internships for the employers, as well as helping with applications for the young people as well, and that support throughout the internship to provide any liaison between the intern and employer for reasonable adjustments, for example. So this is where we enter. So in 2019, Ambitious approached CRAE about conducting an independent 3-year evaluation of Employ Autism. And this was linked to one of CRAE's ongoing projects, the Discover Autism Research and Employment Initiative. And then I took this on as an independent evaluation with my wonderful supervisors, Anna, Brett and Laura. So to ensure replication and influence of their policy and practice, the Employ Autism Network was evaluated, and we had 3 main aims to do this. So the first one was to track and evaluate Employ Autism to facilitate, with regards to how it facilitates a good transition from education into employment. And the second was to enhance knowledge and practice about how to support autistic people moving into employment. And then the third one was to use this evidence to be able to support and drive a final design and framework of the Employ Autism programme so that it can be disseminated and replicated more nationally. And then my studies have more specific aims, which I will go into as we go through those. So I collected data from 3 groups of participants for my PhD. So collected data from interns, employers, and some of the interns' parents or carers to get a better, more holistic understanding of the whole process. So depending on what group participants belong to, they completed a unique set of surveys and interactions with me before, during, and after the internship. So this is just a brief overview of the methods and measures used for each participant for the data I'll be collecting today. This isn't everything, but we don't have a big enough slide for that, so I'll go into more detail for the next slides. But it basically consisted of some surveys during the internship, an interview immediately after the internship, and then follow-up surveys with the interns every 6 months up to 2 years after the internship. So My research project evaluated the time course of the Employ Autism process, and this falls into 3 main studies of the beginning, middle, and end phases, which I will talk through now. So the first study is evaluating the understanding autism in the workplace training that Ambitious About Autism provide for the employers. So a lack of understanding about autism has been identified repeatedly by autistic people as one of the key barriers to employment, largely related to the sort of negative and stereotyped attitudes that many people and employers might have about autism. And there have been some studies to show that online autism training can effectively improve autism knowledge and therefore reduce autism stigma. But a lot of this research has been done in non-autistic university students. And this has also very much been done at a group level, so looking at whether the average autism knowledge score, for example, improves or doesn't. And then also there's very limited evidence about whether such training and these interventions are effective for employers. So this is the first study to evaluate online autism training specifically for employers. And then we also wanted to look at whether the training was effective at an individual level. So whether we wanted to go past those group level changes and see if they were masking or hiding any lack of changes for each participant. So we wanted to look at whether each participant's score was increasing significantly or not. So the training was Understanding Autism in the Workplace, and this training was developed in collaboration with both autistic people, a neurodiversity consulting group, and experienced professionals as well. And the training included an overview about autism, how autistic people experience the world, and how to support and implement adjustments at work as well. And this was really aiming to increase employers' knowledge about autism, as well as their practical capacity to actually be able to promote and facilitate better inclusion in the workplace. And this training was delivered online over a few hours, and it was delivered by either an autistic or non-autistic trainer. So for this study, I collected data from employers from 22 organisations, a total of 129, and this was split into 84 employers who were trained by a non-autistic trainer and 45 employers who were trained by an autistic trainer. So the employers completed a survey about autism knowledge, as well as their commitment to inclusion in the workplace. And they completed this survey before they did the training. Then they did the training, and then they completed the exact same survey after they did the training as well, to see what those changes were. So the group-based results, so these results showed that at a group level, autism knowledge and commitment to inclusion in the workplace did improve from before to after training for all participants with an autistic and non-autistic trainer, which we think is also attributable to the fact that the training was co-designed with autistic individuals as well, so that both trainings had that valuable autistic input and expertise, regardless of whether the training or how the training was being delivered as well. So this was showing that the average scores were increasing significantly from before to after training. But then when we look at the individual results, this is looking to see whether each participant's score changed. There are some different findings. So if you can see here, I'll try and get the laser up. So any scores that fall between this line and this line in the middle, this suggests that there wasn't a reliable or statistically significant change. But any dots or triangles, so each dot or triangle is a participant above this line, suggests that there was a significant increase in scores, and any below this line suggests that there was a significant decrease in scores. So at an individual level, the change in autism knowledge and commitment to inclusion in the workplace was only statistically reliable for a smaller proportion of participants, so 10% and 6% respectively, which is interesting to suggest that perhaps it was some of the larger changes for participants that were pushing that average up, and hiding the fact that maybe for some participants there weren't as big a changes at all. So some conclusions from this study. So as I said, this research is, to our knowledge, the first evaluation of an online autism training initiative for employers, and the first evaluation that looks both at a group and individual level analysis about its effectiveness. So the results are really showing that the training was significantly improving knowledge and commitment to inclusion at a group level, but it wasn't as effective for each participant. There was some variability in how effective it was, and this training was maybe more effective for some participants than others. So I think what this message is really showing, that autism training is a really important foundational and really good starting point for employers to improve knowledge and have that knowledge about improving capacity. But it's really showing that this should not be relied on as the sole initiative to address barriers to employment for autistic people. It shouldn't be relied upon as the kind of tick box exercise. There really needs to be a much broader package of support for employers to actually be able to implement these changes in the workplace and have that ongoing support, which is exactly what Ambitious and Employ Autism does for the employers involved here. But this is really consistent with a lot of the literature on inclusion, or on training rather, that this is a great starting point, but there needs to be a lot broader support as well. So future evaluations of training should also be including this analysis at an individual level to get a much more in-depth and better understanding of its effectiveness too. So if you're interested, this study has been published in the journal Neurodiversity, so you can scan the QR code or follow the link. So moving on to study 2, so this is evaluating the experiences of Employ Autism internships. So the existing evaluations of work experience initiatives, they're mostly focusing on quantitative statistics like employment rates, job retention rates and income, but there's not so much literature that examines the first-hand experiences of those that do take part in supported internship programs. But the few qualitative studies that do exist offer really valuable insights into the barriers and facilitators and the more personal outcomes of supported employment initiatives that quantitative outcome measures can miss. So we felt it was really important to include this qualitative element in the research. So the current study took on a multi-informant approach. So I collected data from interns, employers and parents to conduct the first qualitative evaluation of Employ Autism. So my research questions here are: what are interns, employers and parents' views and experiences of the Employ Autism initiative? And also, do these stakeholders' views align, or are there any differences there? So I did interviews with a total of 51 participants, consisting of 19 interns, 22 employers and 10 parents. And the reason I included parents there is not to go over the interns' views or opinions. It was just because of the involvement that parents do have in this transition to employment and out of education because of the lack of support. So it was I felt it was important to get their views as a kind of more corroboration about the utility and value of this other method of support as well. So 2 autistic young people were consulted and paid to review the internship guidelines and schedules to ensure that the questions were appropriate and clear and precise. And then the participants took part in remote interviews between April 2021 and January 2022. sorry, that should be 2022. And then the interview schedules followed a similar structure and content. So this included a welcome, an overview about previous experience, and then their experience of the internship, their outlook after the internship, and then any comments, closing comments and thanks. And then I used reflective thematic analysis to identify common themes between each participant's interview. So this is a thematic map of the themes that I identified using reflective thematic analysis. And I'll go into these in some more detail, but the three main themes, which are in the kind of mid-grey colour, they are shared by all the groups. And so the interns, employers and parents were all saying the same thing. But some of the other sub-themes were shared only by particular combinations of groups. So you can see that key there. So the first theme, the first overall theme was that Employ Autism was an invaluable experience for everybody who was involved. And the first sub-theme was that Employ Autism afforded an opportunity for self-development in several areas. So, for example, this one intern was saying that they definitely felt more confident in their ability to feel like they can get things done. They felt that they had always been a bit afraid that they're not capable of doing things, but actually most people can do most jobs and they can definitely do most stuff that's thrown at them. I definitely feel much more confident delivering what people want from me and expect from me. And their employers also echoed this sentiment, and they described the interns as a genuine asset to their teams. And explained they wanted to ensure the internship was really positive and rewarding for their interns as well. The second sub-theme was that the interns said that their improved confidence helped them take more initiative and ownership of their responsibilities in day-to-day life. And as well, the parents were saying that such experience also provided them with reassurance about their young person's developing independence. And they described a change in perceptions about their young person's future. So this parent was really stressing that it had given them confidence for their young person's future, and that there might be somewhere for them to work, and that with people who have a good understanding of autism, which was really encouraging to hear. So the first sub-theme of the second overall theme about breaking down barriers to employment. So the interns highlighted that the design of the internship process meant many of the common barriers to employment were broken down to allow an opportunity to get that foot in the door, inverted commas, and get that first opportunity into employment. So the interns were particularly stressing the application process was a lot easier than previous experiences, and they appreciated being able to ask the Employ Autism staff for clarification and feedback on questions. And the parents also described this as a valuable resource for their young person's transition into employment. So the second sub-theme here was that there was good two-way understanding between the interns and the employers. So the interns reported good insight and understanding between themselves and their employers and colleagues. And they think that this experience might be because the internship was specifically for autistic people. So employers were more aware of their interns' needs after having the training and support from Employ Autism. And employers also said that the internship afforded a wider learning opportunity because the experience encouraged them to be more understanding of others' individuality and needs as well. So this sub-theme is specific to employers. So the employers were saying that before the internship, they were describing some initial apprehension about hosting an intern. So they were saying that they didn't know what to expect. And would they be difficult to manage or support, and admitting to having preconceptions about what an autistic person might be like. But this quote really shows that these stereotypes were really challenged through this experience and through working with the young people, which is, and they describe this as a key learning point as well. And then relatedly, following the internship experience, the employers were questioning essentially why their intern had such difficulty finding work because they'd been so wonderful. And in doing this, they were acknowledging that the recruitment process for their organisations could be really disadvantaged, could be a huge barrier for their autistic applicants and other neurodivergent applicants as well. So this employer was explaining that the assessment centre that they're expected to go for isn't set up to cater for somebody on the spectrum, because it's expected that somebody's going to spend the whole day in a group doing different tasks and talking. But from talking to the intern, you could tell they wouldn't like that, and they'd be quiet, but that would look bad from a behavioural point of view. But the employer was reflecting that this was unfair, and these sorts of recruitment strategies would need to change for many people. And then the third theme, so despite there being overwhelmingly positive sentiment about Employ Autism, there were some unmet expectations from all of the groups. So the interns were noting some misjudgments from employers related to how much support they needed. And this could be a little bit patronising as well, unintentionally. And the employers were also saying that they wanted more specific information about their intern skills ahead of the internship, so they could provide more appropriate and more timely support and plan suitable tasks. And then the parents were also wondering whether the internship afforded the interns a bit too much support that was not realistic of what the real world is like, or if it creates false comfort for the future as well. But overall, so the study provides the first multi-informant qualitative analysis of experiences from Employ Autism. And there were 4 key take-home messages that I've drawn from this. So the first one is that supported employment initiatives should include a work experience component instead of just focusing more on skills. And this is really important for interns and employers to boost their own confidence and skills too. The second was to be really specific in addressing known autism-specific employment barriers, such as adjusting the application and recruitment processes and improving employers' autism understanding and acceptance as well. The third one is, where possible, to invest in that tailored support for the intern before, during and after work experience to really support that long-term independence. And then finally, and really importantly, I think the findings here highlight just how important it is that autistic people's voices need to be included in further evaluations and developments and future iterations of programmes like Employ Autism, to make sure that they are useful and appropriate for the autistic community. So, for example, had we not spoken to the autistic young people, we wouldn't have got those reports from interns that they felt some of the employers could be a bit infantilizing towards them, which is a really important message to learn and to apply as well going forward. So this study has also been published, and this is in the journal Autism. So you can follow this link if you want to see more quotes or further discussion on this. And then, so moving on to the third and final study. So this is tracking the long-term outcomes after Employ Autism internships. So those qualitative interviews and study 2, they suggest that the internships were promising and the experiences were positively endorsed by interns, employers and parents. But because the interviews were conducted just after the internships, it didn't offer a lot of insight into how different employment outcomes and wider outcomes changed after the internship, months and years after the internship as well. So the few existing evaluations of supported employment initiatives tend to focus on employment outcomes like employment rates, income, hours worked, etc. But as we well know, the impacts of employment extend well beyond these factors and have a really broad impact on everybody's general life and autistic people's well-being and quality of life and and their mental health. So considering this, an important part of the evaluation was to see what happened to the interns after the internships, and also look at both employment-related aspects and also wider, more holistic outcomes, things like quality of life and mental health as well. And I also wanted to look at this again on an individual level to see what that variability was for each participant as well. So this study aimed to evaluate those long-term employment and wider outcomes of some interns who engaged with Employ Autism. So total of 27 interns involved in the internships across 7 different organisations from a range of sectors, completed some online surveys addressing employment metrics, and then also things like practical skills, because a lot of the literature has suggested that development of practical and key skills and transferable skills for other workplaces. Self-confidence, so the interns' general self-efficacy and their perceived ability to kind of capability to be able to kind of overcome things and do things, and their quality of life, and then their mental health as well. And then they completed these surveys at 3 time points: before the internship, 6 months after the internship, and then in a window of 12 to 24 months after the internship too. So starting with the employment related results, so the employment rates doubled from 26 to 56% after the internship, and 26% of the interns also accepted permanent contracts at their organisations. And of the 13 interns who were employed at more than one follow-up point, 85%, so 11 of the 13, retained this employment until the end of data collection. So these are really encouraging employment results, which are consistent with previous literature on supported employment initiatives. Similarly, before the internship, most of the interns' highest level of employment was at a volunteer or intern level. But after the internship, as you can see in the graph, more interns were saying that they worked at higher levels. So, for example, at entry or graduate level roles. And then similarly with income, before the internship, 75% of the interns were saying that they earned less than £10,000 a year. But after the internship, many more of the interns were saying that they earned over £10,000 a year, some of them even being in that top category of 40 to 49,000, or almost £50,000 a year as well. So moving on to some of the wider results. So users used a repeated measures ANOVA with Bonferroni adjusted post hoc analysis to analyse the group level changes. So you can see I've used asterisks to kind of highlight the significant changes here. So there were some significant improvements on a number of the subscales for these daily living practical skills. So improvements on the subscale of community use, home living, health and safety, work, functional academics, and leisure as well. So it's showing that these daily practical skills seem to improve up to 24 months post-internship. However, when we look at the other wider factors, there weren't any significant changes. So self-efficacy, quality of life, and mental health didn't show any group level changes up to 24 months post-internship, which is interesting. And then when I looked at individual level findings, so I used a reliable change index to analyse changes per participant. When we look at this, there were reliable changes in both directions, so improvements and not improvements in both directions for participants on all of these measures, so practical skills, self-efficacy, quality of life, and mental health as well. So some of the conclusions from this, I think these findings really show that outline the remit and the scope of what Employ Autism can and can't do. So supported employment initiatives might be really important to support employment outcomes and also the development of practical applied skills that are useful for engaging with the community and work afterwards, that are difficult to kind of develop without work experience. But they're not a panacea, they're not a cure-all for more global factors like mental health. And I think this really highlights how important those wider resources and wider forms of support in education, social and mental health care, and how important these are to remain alongside employment support as well. So this study is under review in the journal Neurodiversity. So this touchwood should be out early next year, but you can keep an eye via this link, and I'm sure will be shared via Cray's social media as well. So I am aware of time, so I'm just going to go over the general discussion now, just to draw together some of these findings. I think also it's really important to acknowledge that I didn't have a comparison group of people who weren't linked to Employ Autism. So admittedly, this does make it really hard to determine any causality of Employ Autism or for any of the studies. But my research does offer some really valuable insights into the outcomes that are related specifically to Employ Autism. And while the lack of a comparison group kind of complicates the ability to assess causality, there are some really important and valuable take-home messages that can be applied going forward as well. So the first thing is that the evaluation provides a multifaceted evidence base for Employ Autism. So using both quantitative and qualitative measures and data, it shows that Employ Autism is a promising model for supported employment initiatives. And also maybe really does this by recognising that double empathy problem between autistic employees and employers of the predominant neurotypes. So it's providing support for both the intern and the employer to foster that better two-way understanding as well. The second thing my findings highlight is in relation to the variability in individual outcomes for all the stakeholders, which might not be surprising to hear, but I think it's important to highlight for future evaluations and how important it is to be looking at things on an individual level as well, to get a more nuanced understanding of how effective supported employment initiatives are. Third, so there were some enduring autism-specific challenges during the Employ Autism process related to remaining and persevering misconceptions and autism stigma. But I think this really does highlight that there just needs to be, well, I say not just, but there needs to be more amplified efforts to address autism stigma, so by increasing autism awareness and education for employers and at a broader, more societal level as well. And then finally, the lack of change in quality of life and mental health measures and the variability in outcomes as well. And then also coupled with, from the interviews, a high value being placed on meaningful work. All of these findings really challenge that traditional that traditional way of kind of measuring successful employment for autistic people. So it's really kind of highlighting to ensure that research and practice going forward needs to recognise the complexity of employment for autistic people, and make sure in its evaluation and when employment is being promoted that it's ethical and does support positive outcomes for each individual person, and this measuring maybe needs to be more individualized for each individual and what they consider to be a successful outcome, and whether they want to be working full-time or part-time, what income level they do want to be earning as well. This needs to be adjusted and considered when sort of promoting employment and also measuring employment as well. So I think overall these insights are hopefully helpful to outline the remit, scope, and also the limits of some supported employment initiatives for autistic people without a learning disability. And they can also maybe be applied to the development of current and similar initiatives too. But yes, I'm going to finish up now, but I hope this research more broadly is contributing to addressing those sorts of wider issues of the systemic employment gap for autistic people and their right to work. But I am very happy to take any questions after this. There's a lot to unpack there. So as I mentioned, I'm now working as a research manager at Employ Autism, at Ambitious About Autism, sorry, working quite closely with the policy and campaigns team as well. There are plans to launch a more public-facing report of all these findings and more, hopefully in 2025. But you can find out more about Employ Autism via this link and QR code. And then if you do want to read the whole thesis, and then that will also be available on the UCL data repository. But I'm aware of time, so I'm very happy to take any questions now.
Maria, thank you ever so much. That was excellent. I do enjoy an incredibly well-structured talk, and you went from the workplace, from the training that needs to be there beforehand, into the workplace itself, to the long-term analysis of it. Thank you ever so much. You took us on a beautiful journey that was grounded in the participant's voice. And you came back to that again and again. I really, really lovely stuff, particularly about that, trying to unpack the double empathy problem within the workplace. I will say that there was a wonderful bit that came across in the tracking where I saw that leisure improved. Now, you know, I'm a crusty old socialist and I get grumpy about the concepts of job and employment sometimes, but to see people's leisure time get better because of employment, it really was heartwarming. And you've just changed me a little bit when I'm a downer on employment. So thank you ever so much for that. We have a whole handful of questions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Got 7 questions, and so we're going to be doing about a minute each. At this point, I'm going to stop recording. I'm going to say thank you again, and goodbye to anyone who's with us on YouTube.